learn about the SQ3R strategy, and the strategy has 5 steps. So the first step is to survey. So we are going to read the subtitle of our book. So we know that this is about Jackie Robinson, so it says he was the first. But it doesn't really give further detail about what he was the first of. So we're going to look at the pictures to see if we can kind of get some context clues from that. So we see his uniform. He has a uniform on and a baseball bat. So that means it has to do with baseball. And he was on the Dodgers, the Brooklyn Dodgers. So always make sure you look at those to give you clues. So our next step is to ask questions, which we want to ask who, what, where, when, and why. So we're going to look at our textbook here. We're going to look at our book, and we're going to see that it has a table of contents. So the table of contents is going to help us kind of formulate our questions. And the first chapter is on the freedom train. Now we think to ourselves, what's that? What's the freedom train? Like, you don't really know what that is, so we're gonna hopefully learn about that in the first chapter. And then Pepper Street, Pasadena. So we want to know where that is. We're not really sure where that is, and hopefully the story will give more details to that. So the next 3 chapters are the young athlete, college hero, and army life. I wonder what that has to do with him. That might help us answer the questions of when. So when those take place. And then the next one is a ball player with guts. What does that mean? I'm not really sure what that means, so hopefully that will give us an idea of that. And Jackie Robinson, Jackie was the first. The first what? We hopefully will find that out. And then triumphs and tragedy. So that's gonna give us our why. Like, why was he triumphant, and where was their tragedy, and why did he have tragedy? So one good thing about the book too is it gives us important dates. So we look at here and it gives us all the important dates that has to do with his life. So now we're going to go to the next step, which is read. So we're going to read the first chapter. And the good thing is it has pictures too, which are really awesome. So it says, Jackie Robinson was talented, determined, and disciplined. He was a great athlete and a hero to baseball fans across the country. He was also a hero to supporters of equal rights for all people. In 1947, when he played for the Brooklyn Dodgers, he became the first black man to play modern-day Major League Baseball. That's interesting. That might be important. That's probably very important. So let's write that down. So, first black man, I'm gonna say baseball. Okay? So Jackie Robinson was born in a small old farmhouse near Cairo, Georgia, in January 31st, 1919. Jackie's grandfather had been a slave, so that might actually be important. So let's write that down too. So his father, Jerry Robinson, was a sharecropper and worked on a farm that was owned by somebody else. Jerry Robinson kept half of what he grew. The owner of the farm kept the other half. Soon after Jackie was born, Jerry Robinson decided he was tired of farming. He said he might go as far away as Texas to look for some other kind of work. He left his wife, Mally, and their 5 children in January 1990. Let's write that down because that might actually help us answer one of our other questions. So his father left January 1919. So he went off to Florida and never came back. Without her husband to work the farm, Millie Robinson and her children had to leave. They found a place to stay for a while, but it was not a good time to be a black person in Georgia. Let's see if it'll tell us why. During the summer of 1919, there was a terrible race riots in Chicago, Illinois, and Elena, Arkansas, and in Washington, D.C. There was also trouble in Georgia, too. In April, black lodges and churches were burned in Moline, Georgia. So let's write that down, because that might be important. So, black lodges and churches burned in April. A mob dragged a black prisoner from jail and killed him. In September, black schools in Georgia and more black churches were burned. So let's write that down too. Black schools and churches burned. September. In May 1920, Millie Robertson and her 5 children carried baskets, boxes, old suitcases, bags, and bundles and headed west. Millie called the train that took her family to California her Freedom Train. Jackie was just 16 months old. And that's the end of that first chapter. Now, so we've done the first 4 steps. So we also pause at each section to write down little notes for ourselves, because that's very important. That's part of reciting. So we want to make sure we look at that and kind of figure out what is important information and note that down. And then we need to review. So when we review, we create a study guide, and we take all the information that we learned from that chapter and we apply it to a study guide and just write out the information in the study format so that we make sure we know. So he was the first black man to do baseball. So that could be point 1. And then his grandfather was a slave and his father left in January 1919. So that could be points 2 and 3. And then the black lodges and churches burned in April. And then the black schools and churches burned in September. So those are points 4 and 5. And those are important because that caused his mom to take them on the Freedom Train. So that's the main point of that chapter, was all of this stuff created his mom to take them on a train to move away from Georgia because they needed to get away from there. So as we're reading through each chapter, you need to make sure that you go through each of those steps. All those steps are going to help you be able to process what you're reading and figure out and make steps and understand and comprehend what you're reading better.